From PoliticsPA, I'm Steve Ulrich, and this is Voices of Reason. What does election integrity mean to you? Is it requiring an ID to vote? Is it making sure that non-citizens do not vote? Do you want the government to have Pennsylvania's voter rolls? Today we'll talk with Mercer County Director of Elections Thad Hall and Committee of 70 Senior Advisor on Election Administration Tim Benyo for their thoughts. That's next on Voices of Reason. Now it's my pleasure to welcome a pair of former colleagues to the program, Thad Hall, Director of Elections for Mercer County, and Tim Benyo, former Election Director for Lehigh County and now Senior Advisor for Election Administration with the Committee of 70. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today on Voices of Reason.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thad, let me start with you. How did you get involved with election administration originally?
So back in 2000, when we had election issues in Florida with the Al Gore and George W. Bush election, I was working in Washington, D.C. with a foundation, and I was one of the professional staff that worked with the National Commission on Federal Election Reform with President Carter and President Ford. And that's how I got involved in doing election work. And then I did consulting work with the Federal Voting Assistance Program, who they oversee voting for people who are in the military and overseas. And then I did consulting work and worked as an academic for a while. And then in 2018, I actually became an election director in South Carolina and went from there to Arizona. And then I came here to Pennsylvania in August of 2020.
And Tim, what's been your journey to election administration?
Well, mine seems to be a little bit longer. 2006, I was in IT, and with the Help America Vote Act, we went to electronic voting machines in Pennsylvania. So I learned how to program the voting machines. The position of election director became available in Carbon County, Pennsylvania, and I apparently was qualified for that position because I could program machines. Went into that in probably 2008, 2010. I moved to Lehigh County, and I was there for 16 years, where in March I moved to my semi-retirement part-time jobs of Committee of 70 Administration of Elections Advisor, and I also work for Vet the Vote, which is an organization that recruits veterans as poll workers.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about that as we move on, but let's talk a little bit about election administration, everything that's been in the news. Thursday night, certainly President Trump gave a nationwide address, and one of the things that was released was an intelligence report that said the most damaging thing a foreign power could do is not necessarily hack a voting machine, but to convince Americans they had done that. Is that the big problem we have right now in election administration, is the fact that people just are convinced otherwise, that they're not safe and secure? I'll start with that.
Well, this has been an ongoing issue for a long time, that people can claim to have done things and that you can't prove it's not true. It's like, you can't prove a negative isn't true. And so that's always been a big issue. And I think the other issue that we have is that, if you look at people in Lehigh County or in York County where you worked, or in Mercer County, I think people have confidence that the local election officials are doing things correctly. The bigger issue comes in convincing people that elections are being done fairly in other places or in other states. And people see so much news online, and they see how things are being done in other states, and it doesn't correspond with their personal experiences. And so I think that one of the big issues we have is just people hearing things in the news or seeing things, and then it just doesn't jive with their personal experience, and they think that doesn't seem fair, that seems like they're moving the goalposts, and that causes a big problem.
Tim, that's a good point. You hear people maybe in Blair County or Northumberland, they say their elections are running fine, but it's those people in Allegheny and Philadelphia County.
Yeah, that has been ongoing for probably ever. As long as elections have been going on, there's always, everyone's on a different team, or that concept of being on different teams, but the idea is to encourage voters and participants to get involved in the whole process and to see what's going on in your county, because it's going on in other counties in Pennsylvania too. There's checks and balances, there's audits, bipartisan oversight. Both teams are watching the whole process, and all the paper trails. So I encourage people to get involved so that they can see what's going on in their county, because it is going on in the other counties also.
Right now, the big push in Congress over the last 2 weeks before the summer recess is to get the Save America Act passed. Election administration certainly under fire from the Trump administration and others. Tim, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts about the Save America Act?
Well, as we were talking about influence, but there are also interference and allowing different countries to, it's gone on forever, to be involved in influencing the elections. But the interference in elections is keeping people from voting and keeping people from having that God-given right to access the voting.
That
Well, I think that what's interesting about the Save Act is that they're taking something that I think is not very controversial, which is the idea that people should show ID when they vote. If you look at survey data, people like the idea that people should show ID when they vote. Showing ID has very high bipartisan support. But what they've done in the Save Act is they've made it super complicated that you'd have to show proof of citizenship. And the interesting thing that people don't realize is that for most people, showing proof of citizenship, it actually isn't very difficult. Who it's difficult for are old people. And so if you looked, like when I worked in Arizona, people had to show proof of citizenship. And, the most difficult group of people it affected were people who were older. So for instance, you may have been born in, 1940 in, Maine or Montana, and you now live in Pennsylvania, and getting a original copy of your birth certificate is no mean feat, even with electronics and all that. And so the problem is one of just people being able to get the documentation. And if you look at Pennsylvania, we're a relatively old state, and ironically, the people who would be affected are all the rural counties. If you look at Philadelphia, their average age is in the high 30s, and so they have a very young population. They're going to be able to get IDs. It's the people in rural counties who are going to be the most affected by something like that.
Pennsylvania, I believe, is in the minority of states that actually does have real ID. And when you take, that is one of the requirements of the act to show when you go to vote, is real ID, birth certificate, and passport. Is that the three that they're looking at right now?
But
Either one.
Voters have to pay for that, and they shouldn't have to pay for showing something to giving their right in voting. They shouldn't have to pay for those things.
Right. And like when I was in South Carolina, we actually provided people with photo IDs at the voter registration office. So that was part of what we did, is we could provide you with a photo voter registration card that had your photo on it, and that served as your photo ID.
And wasn't it 2012 when the voter ID did pass in Pennsylvania, but then was struck down by the court because that people had to pay for that ID?
Right.
Let me move on to another controversial topic in the Commonwealth, and that's mail ballots. In your opinion, in your professional opinions, are they safe and secure, Tim?
I'd say absolutely. There are safeguards checking correspondence numbers. Each of those ballots have their own correspondence number, where that when they go out, they have the number, and if it comes back with a different number, then there's an issue, and then that would be flagged within the county and by different means and that each county has.
Right. And when people apply for a mail-in ballot, the other thing that they do is they have to we have to do a check where we make sure that the person who applied, that their personal identifier, so their name, their date of birth, and either the last four digits of their social security number or their driver's license number match up. And if they don't, we have to go into the system. We have to contact that voter, they have to provide us with the matching information. So, you know, we are doing, you know, pretty strong matches in that regard. And, you know, the other thing I think people need to remember, again, you know, talking about the counties, is the people who are voting by mail primarily are older. So if I look at my by mail voter population, the median person is 74 years old. So half the people in my county who are voting by mail are older than 74. And these people are voting by mail because they have a disability, they have, you know, they have a sciatica, they don't know what the weather's going to be like, they have to drive on a dirt road to get to their polling place, they don't know if it's going to be a dusty day or a muddy day. And so, you know, I think if you look at the process, you know, it's helping people who are, basically it's helping old people be able to continue to participate.
And if those IDs are not verified, they have to provide that information before that ballot counts. They may
Right.
receive the ballot, but as long as it stays unverified, it won't be counted. They
Right.
must provide ID.
And I think that's one of the things that always frosts me as a former election director is it seems like we're always in the education process and letting people know, because a lot of people don't know that military and overseas votes can be counted, can be received after election day, correct?
Right.
Correct.
And you still hear a
So
lot of folks out here,
one
people
week
who are
after the
voting after
election.
election day. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there's also some fail safes built in. There's a post-election audit or two now. Dan, I'll start with you. Can you explain exactly what is entailed in these audits?
Sure. So the one audit that we do statewide is what's called a risk limiting audit. And the idea is we take one of the statewide races and they are able to um, determine from the margin of victory for one candidate over the other, and they figure out, well, how many ballots do we need to audit to make sure that the results are accurate? That's the easiest way to explain it. And then what they do is they draw a sample, well, they draw a number, and then they determine which counties have to go in and count ballots to get to the number of ballots they need to have counted. And so we do that for every election. And then under statute, we're required to do what's called it's called a 2% audit. The statute is not very clear of how we're going to do it, but basically there's one of two ways people do it. Either you would run your ballots through a different type of machine. So for instance, if you use a precinct scanner on election day and you want to rescan those ballots, you would scan them on a central count machine, which is a different type of scanner, or you just hand count them. And so like in my county, for instance, I bring in people from the Democratic and Republican parties, put them in bipartisan teams, and then I have them go through, and then they actually pick the precincts that we audit, and then they do the hand count for them. And that gives us a lot of confidence because I'm not the one doing the audit. It's my political parties who are doing it. And the political parties are my biggest, you know, they're two of my biggest constituencies. You know, if I can make them happy, then everybody's happy. And we also let them, you know, if they have a race they're concerned about, like a school board race, especially like in municipal election years, we let them pick a precinct that they want to have audited. And so we give them some flexibility to make sure that they're confident in whatever race they're most concerned about as well.
Tim, the Department of State, have they caught counties that have been making errors? Are these numerous, or has this been a pretty fail-safe way to make sure that all 67 counties are doing the job correctly?
I think with the addition of the risk limiting audit, it's definitely helped counties become better at the auditing process, making sure that everything is okay. Yes, the Department of State is involved with each county, and the counties must certify those results from both audits to the Department of State.
One of the great fallacies that you hear all the time from citizens is the fact that we need to do a hand count of this race or that race. And if my memory serves me correctly, that isn't exactly the best way to come up with an accurate count. Correct, Tim?
Oh, very correct. Yes, like that, Lehigh County did a hand count with representatives from both parties. and any citizens that wanted to be involved in the hand count. And it usually, we had lost people before the end of the results because of how tedious and how inaccurate it was compared to the machines that are counting the votes.
Right. And if you look at, there's academic research, and I was actually involved in a little bit of some of that work back when I was an academic, and hand counts are difficult to do, especially if you're doing it for a large number of races. And so like the way we're doing it in an audit, it's actually, you can do it, but if you were trying to do it for, if I try to do it for all 90 of my precincts for, especially like in a municipal election where I have multiple races that are like I have a vote for not more than 4 school board race. Like those are a nightmare to hand count. And I mean, and it's interesting because people say, well, in other countries they do hand counts, and I've actually seen hand counts in other countries, and they were hand counting a single race. So they're hand counting a parliamentary election race, or they're hand counting a presidential race. They're not hand counting, a sheriff race and a school board race and a governor's race and 4 judge races. They're not. Their ballots are like one contest, and if it's one contest, you can do it, but you can't do it for the way we elect people, especially here in Pennsylvania, where we elect everybody.
We all worked in county election offices in 2020. It's still kind of amazing to me that we're still talking about it. Looking back at that election, were there issues that we missed or were not aware of then?
So when you look back at the 2020 election, which seems like forever ago now, I think there are two there are 2 issues that just arose because of the election. The on the administrative side, I think people, all the counties were just overwhelmed with how many mail-in ballots we had, and it was the first real election where we were counting a massive number of mail-in ballots. So, for instance, in my county, we went from 2% mail-in ballots in 2018 to 21% in 2020. And so it was just a huge influx. And so, developing a process for counting that many mail-in ballots that was tremendous. I think the other big issue about 2020, and this goes back to your initial comment about confidence, is, and Tim will remember this, you both will, there were just so many lawsuits going on. And there were people arguing in front of the Supreme Court, and they were basically trying to change the rules of the election during the election. So, like, were we going to accept ballots after that came in the 3 days after the election? And I actually think that a lot of the litigation that groups do, when it's done right around the time of the election, that can really undermine people's confidence in the whole process, because people want there to be one set of rules that the election is being run under. And in 2024, the state Supreme Court, very smartly said, we're not going to hear any more contests, after, like, I think it was like September 15th. They were like, we're done. Don't sue and try to come to us and get us to solve your problems. We're running the election under the rules we have. So I think in 2020, the big issue was just a volume of mail-ins, but also just kind of this overhang of litigation that made it, everything was really unclear for a lot of us, until I guess it was mid-September that the Supreme Court finally ruled like what the rules were going to be.
Tim, what do you recall from all of that?
Exactly what Thad said. Counties have gotten so much better at processing all the huge influx of ballots, plus everything else that goes around mail ballot voting. The counties weren't funded. They weren't ready for that mass of work. They just didn't have the money in. So now they're better equipped, better funded, and in a better place than they were in 2020.
Right. And if I could just really quickly just say, the legislature in 2022 really did a great thing when they passed the Election Integrity Grant Program, which gives the state $45 million, which is divided among counties based on our registered voter population. So, I'm the median-sized county in the state, roughly, and my county gets about 385 $100,000 every year to help with the elections, and that makes sure that I can hire all the people I need. I can buy equipment that makes my, mail-in ballot counting or my precinct ballot counting or my voter check-ins or whatever work better. I can pay for more staff, part-time staff to make things work. It's been a huge benefit, and so the legislature deserves credit for doing that.
Well, let me follow up on the legislature, because certainly the election code has always been a topic of conversation around Harrisburg. Tim, in your mind, what kind of things should Pennsylvania legislators be focused on when we talk about Commonwealth elections?
Well, we've been asking for more time to pre-canvass ballots, mail ballots since it was 2019 when the act was enabled and that mail balloting was allowed, no excuse mail balloting. So it's the same ideas, more time.
So let me just make sure everyone understands. Pre-canvassing is when the mail ballot is received in advance, being able to prepare it, get it ready for election day, correct?
Correct. And since it was enacted, it was a longer period of time when first enacted. It was updated a little bit that we can start at 7 a.m. on election day, but that's still, it makes election directors and offices stretch very thin because they have to do multiple elections at the same time, over the counter, the mail ballots, and on election day, the in-person voting.
Is that still the emphasis behind the Election Directors Association?
It is, and one of the things I would also just say is that our legislature is uniquely bad about not looking at other states' legislation. So, for instance, a lot of the problems that we saw with Act 77, which was the law that allowed us to have no excuse mail-in voting, some of the controversies that have arisen from that are the issue of pre-canvassing, having ballot drop boxes, ballot curing, things like that. If the legislature had, looked at the laws in other states, they would have seen how to address those problems more effectively, so we wouldn't have these issues in the first place. And even today with the pre-canvassing, it's really interesting. There was a bill that passed the House, I guess it was like about 6 weeks ago, about pre-canvassing. And the interesting thing about the law is it just says counties can pre-canvass a week before the election. But if you look at pre-canvassing laws in other states, that's not how they are structured. They say you can pre-canvass, the pre-canvassing must be done with bipartisan teams. You must track the ballots in a certain way. You must, you should do X, Y, and Z to make sure the process has bipartisanship and integrity. And here they just don't do that. And it's kind of, it can be very befuddling to somebody who's worked in other states to see that they don't, there are lessons out there and you can learn from them, and we don't do that. And it's very weird.
Well, speaking of befuddling, let's talk about mail ballots and the signature. I know I saw during my time in York County, people who would sign today's date as their birth date. They would not sign the ballot. They would sign it any place but where they're supposed to. They wouldn't sign it at all. How important in your minds is the idea of making sure that a ballot is signed, a mail ballot in particular, is signed and dated properly? I'll start with Tim.
Well, the idea that on a technicality, a ballot can be dismissed and the voter disenfranchised because of a clerical error, it just seems ridiculous that we could take that right away from a voter. They should have the ability, and if the legislature wants to fight about it, then they need to come up with the rules, or to be more specific on how counties must cure them or the voter must replace it. There has to be some reasoning and definitions that counties can follow, or we continue with having 67 different ways to do an election.
That
And to go to to the specifics, you can, if we separate the two for a minute, the dating part, was put in there because lawyers don't believe that you can sign something without dating it. It's kind of like goes against all of their belief systems. So it got it, I'm sure that language is in there because lawyers were like, well, they're signing something, so they need to date it. But the other issue, which is kind of interesting about the signature part, is that we only capture signatures in Pennsylvania once, which is when the voter registers. So in other states, there's an ongoing process of capturing signatures. So for instance, every time Tim votes in a primary and a general election, we would capture his signature at least twice a year, right? Or once a year if he votes once a year. If he signs a petition, we would capture it. We don't do any of that here in Pennsylvania, and it's very annoying. The other thing too is to go to Tim's point, there does need to be uniformity in the process of how we do ballot curing. And one of the strange things that we encounter here is that so much of our election code is actually written by the state Supreme Court because the legislature doesn't go in and address these problems either at the outset when they're developing the legislation or when the court rules on something. The legislature can say, okay, well, the court says we need to have some sort of curing process. This is how you do it. Or they could say, this is when your ballot is cast when it's when you send it to the election office, which would also be another way of like addressing the curing problem where they basically say you can't cure it, and they don't do that. And so instead we just hug in this limbo where we have 67 counties trying to figure out how the best way to do it. And and I would assume between now and 2028 there will be more lawsuits about that pit counties against counties on, well, they cure one way, you don't cure that way. Why don't you cure that way? You're disenfranchising people by not curing the way that some other county does it. And it just creates this uncertainty that's not very helpful.
Well, you talk about curing. If you go to your polling place and you make a mistake on your ballot, you can have that voided and get a new one. If you vote by
Right.
mail, because of our situations, that can't be fixed. And we all need to be very glad there's no signature verification, because I know full well, for example, my signature looks nothing like what did the first time you captured it, right?
Right. Well, in 2020, I actually did process 2 mail-in applications for people who have lived in the same house and never changed anything about their registration in 70 years. So they were 88 years old or 91 years old. And so like their signatures, I'm sure, are a little different, 70 years ago.
One would
You'd
think. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about getting citizens involved in the election process. Tim, I'll start with you in your new role as a senior advisor. What do you want to do? Is this more of a getting a larger pool of registrants within the Commonwealth? Is it helping county election directors get more poll workers? What exactly do you think is the best way to get more citizens involved?
Well, I think education is the key to getting more citizens involved in the election process. Committee 70 has a great program called the Election Academy, where folks can go and visit their warehouses and see the whole process. And when I was a director, I always, if there was a question from anyone, I would take them in and show them where their ballot goes, how it's checked, all the different parts of the ballot. And I think that is a great resource and a great help to people to understand the whole election process.
That I know the unsung heroes when it comes to elections are those who actually work on election day, the judges of elections, the inspectors, the clerks, but we still have a dearth of folks who want to work on election day. What can we do to encourage more people to come out and help at the polls?
Sure. Well, actually, Tim is involved. He was talking earlier about his work with veterans. And I think, one of the things we know is that when people encounter a veteran who's working at the polling place, they're more confident in the election process. People tend to trust veterans. Tim's a veteran, so I trust him. But one of the things, that people, I'm very lucky, and this varies by county, is I have 2 very well-run political parties. And the political parties play such a key role in making sure that people participate. They do, if they're really good, they do very good outreach to people, but they're also really good at helping us recruit people who want to be active in the process to work on election day. And across the Commonwealth, if you look at different counties, you can see some counties have really strong, healthy political parties, and some counties have very dysfunctional political parties. And that's that's something that county election directors can't control, but it really is helpful to have, if you have a very strong, vibrant political party, Democrats and Republicans, it makes everything a lot easier.
Some final thoughts when it comes to election administration, things that we didn't touch on. I'll start with Tim.
Well, I think we covered a lot in a short amount of time.
That's good.
But there are so many organizations and so many different people trying to do good work. All the election directors, the counties are trying to do the best that they can to get these elections done in a fair and safe, secure manner. Volunteer for these organizations, volunteer to be a poll worker. When you have questions, go to the right source, go to a real source of information, and just be involved and know the process, know when you can and how to spot things that just aren't true. And they're used to give conflict and make conflict between people where the truth is the truth, and we have to go by the laws, and there's a lot of people that can answer questions very correctly.
Before I ask that, the same thing, I wanted to give you a chance to speak a little bit about the Vet the Vote program, which you touched on earlier, and Thad just mentioned as well.
Yeah, as Thad mentioned, there's studies that prove the fact that if a veteran is working at a polling location, that people have more confidence in feel more secure about the process. So that's the whole premise behind Vet the Vote. It's a nationwide organization. Each state, we're in a small amount of states now, but we're trying to get a larger influence in the states that need help with poll workers, and we're here to work hand in hand with the different organizations that are trying to promote the safe, secure elections.
Thad, some final thoughts.
Sure. Well, I would just make a couple of quick thoughts. Number one, like Tim was saying, if you ever have a question about elections, people should just contact their local election office and talk to them. They're the people who are going to be able to answer your question and provide you with the context that you need to understand things. Secondly, if you have issues that you see with elections, in addition to contacting us, you should always contact your state legislators and mention to them that there's got to be a better way to do some of these things, and that they should focus on elections. And finally, I think people should realize that we have 67 counties, we have 67 election directors, and we all work together really well to try to make sure that the elections across the Commonwealth are safe and secure, and that we're doing things to make sure that everybody can participate. We're working very hard to make sure that we don't have any of the issues that are being talked about. We have people who are very diligent of making sure that only eligible people are registering, that we don't have any issues with people submitting fraudulent applications. That happened in 2024, and we're very lucky the Commonwealth Attorney General prosecuted those cases with the help of a lot of our Tim and I's colleagues. And so we take all of this very seriously, and we work together very closely to make sure that we're doing the best we can to make sure that everybody who's eligible can vote, and that they have a good experience on election day, and that we have plans for what to do if anything goes wrong. And you should just feel confident that that your elections are being run by very professional people who care a lot about making sure that you can participate in this democracy.
My thanks to two of the best election directors that I worked with during my time. Thad Hall, Director of Elections in Mercer County. Tim Benyo, former Director of Elections in Lehigh County, now the Senior Advisor for Election Administration with the Committee of 70. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today on Voices of Reason.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My thanks to Thad Hall, Director of Elections for Mercer County, and Tim Benyo, Senior Advisor for Election Administration with the Committee of 70, for joining me today on Voices of Reason. This episode was produced by Brianne O'Neill. For Pennsylvania political news every weekday morning, sign up for the PoliticsPA Playbook at politicspa.com. That's it for Voices of Reason. I'm Steve Ulrich. See you next time.